Hello and welcome back to the podcast. It's amazing to have you with me as ever, and I'm very grateful for you being here. So this week I'm going to respond. One of the things I love to do is people will send me messages on LinkedIn or other social channels and will ask me questions about, can I help them out with certain elements. And I've had a request this week for a podcast around a question which I'm going to answer and go through the podcast, which I hope is going to be useful for you. And it's all about how can you sell cross-selling from a group of companies into businesses. In other words, how can you sell a group of services, or if you've got multiple companies or multiple services, how can you sell more of those into one company? And sometimes the end angle of this, I guess, is probably known as upselling or cross-selling. But it's about how, if you've got a series of services and things that you offer, how can you take those, or series of businesses even, how can you take those into one company and sell them multiple elements? So I'm going to talk a little bit about this and what's important about it. It's probably more relevant if you're running a business, but it could still be relevant if you're running, actually that's not true actually, it could be still relevant if you're running a consumer-based service. You would sell, a good example of this actually would be an insurance company. There's some insurance companies now that if they sell you your car insurance, are then thinking, well, hold up a sec, can we sell our home insurance, and can we then sell our travel insurance and maybe our life insurance? And the reality is, the more services you can sell to one company or to one person, the stickier that client will get. And let me share some details and stats to show you this. There was a company called Sherlaws a number of years ago that did some research, and what they showed in that research is the moment you sell into a company, you have, if you sell one service into a company or into a person or a company, the chance of that customer staying a customer for life are 50%. So 1 in every 2 customers you sell into will stay with you. Others potentially will leave and change. But what the research showed was that as you add more services, or as you sell more things into that customer, the chance of them staying with you for life exponentially grows. So, for example, 2 services into that customer, your chance of them staying a customer for life are 70%. 3 services, it goes to 85%. But scary enough, if you can sell 4 services into a customer, into a company or a consumer, the chance of that person or company staying with you as a customer for life is 95%. So if you think about that, it's just bonkers how you can work with people and businesses to achieve what you want to, and also keep them sticky, which is the most important thing from a customer perspective, because we should know, it costs a huge amount more to recruit new customers than it does to work with existing customers. The profit margins are significantly higher on existing customers because you haven't got to pay for new business to bring them on board. Your cost of managing them and delivering things for them drops because they're comfortable with what you do and they understand what you're about. And I know this from working and owning a software company a number of years ago. So I owned a software company from 2005, an online software company from 2005 through to 2020. And it was, our customers that stayed with us. We had some customers that stayed with us for years and years. And the more services we could offer them, the more they did with us. And they were happy. We were happy. And we made excellent margin on those customers. So if you can sell more services into a company, you're going to be in a fantastic position to do this. It's going to give you some incredible returns as a business to think about that. So look, what I'm going to do today is going to talk about it related mainly in some cases I'm going to talk about it mainly related to the business side of things, because the company that asked this question I know sells into other businesses. But like I've just given with the insurance example, the commonalities are the same. If you've got multiple services that you can sell, and this is also why supermarkets in the UK started to open up banks. So a number of years ago, Sainsbury's as a supermarket, you were doing your shopping there. They were then going, okay, what other services can we sell to this customer and how can we link them together? And they started, I know for a fact, because my wife had a Sainsbury's saving bank account. And then they started to sell insurance. And then they started to sell travel money and all these other services. And that made my wife and potentially me certainly quite sticky with that organisation. They're our shop that we use them now because we started doing more with them, and they started to link and give us values and deals for working multiple things together. So the more services you offer to a customer, the stickier they're going to be. So let's just look into this and look through 7 or 8 key points that are really critical when it comes to doing this. The first thing it is really try and focus on, and I've talked about this a lot in my podcasts, but when you're selling into a group or any set of individuals, it's really important that you understand the customer, the buyer. But certainly you understand, if you're selling into a company, that you understand that company. So if I was selling one service into a business at the moment, and I was thinking I'd like to be able to offer 2 or 3 other services alongside that, what I would be looking to do would be to really understand the key elements behind that company's strategic objectives. What metrics do they care about in their business? What's on their agenda? How are they doing things at the moment? What's their direction of travel, and how does that link to what I do? And especially the larger organizations that you sell to, and some of the larger ones that you will go to, a lot of people will tell you this. They'll share with you their direction. Their executives will talk in blogs or in public reports about where they're trying to get to. And the more you understand that company, but also the more you understand their industry and they understand what's going on and what's challenging them, what's creating tension for them, what's creating opportunity for them, what's the SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats for that organization and for their industry, the more it's going to help you to then see where they're going so that you can see which of your services in time could link work well for them. So the first thing is, understand your audience. And understand the company, or if you're selling into a consumer, understand the situation that they've got, their family, on their dynamics and what's happening. What's on their agenda? What are they trying to do? And of course, that's harder to do as consumers because that information isn't as publicly available. But in companies, it is. And you can start to get an insight into what they're trying to do if you start to research and look for it. And again, this is where AI can be a big friend. It can help you an awful lot because you can start to go and search on tools and to say, what are the strategic objectives of this company? What is the most publicly listed information around what they're trying to achieve? What's on their agenda for the next 1 to 2 years? And the reason that's so important is because, as I'll talk about later on in the podcast, if you want to sell something into someone or sell another service, that's great. But if what you're selling isn't meeting the direction of where they're going, then you're going to have a challenge to do that. And you've got to understand your audience. And if that audience that you're engaging with isn't going to want to buy 2 or 3 of those services, what audience could want to do that? And you'll need to think through that so you can then start to try and upsell and take more of those services to that organization. So that's the first thing. And I think this is a good thing for you to do in any form when it comes to engaging with customers. Become an expert in their industry. Become a knowledgeable value creator in their space. What's going on in their industry? What's going on in their world? What's driving change for them in the future? And become someone that they think, I want to have conversations with that person because they understand me and they understand what I'm about. And I've said for a long time that sales is all about understanding your audience and what they do. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think I would also do is to link into that, is to do what I would call a customer account or a customer map. So have a little look at the areas of the business or the areas of the people and map it out. So get on a whiteboard and get some pens out and try and map the different divisions or the different structures of the business. And again, sometimes some of this information can be found on LinkedIn, on other tools, data tools. You can find it on Google. You can search on ChatGPT or other AI tools. Try and have a look at what the map of that organization is. So a couple of years ago, I was helping a software company sell a quite expensive piece of software into some large manufacturing organizations. And what we were able to do is we were able to work out which division linked to which part of the division, how that linked into this bigger holding company, and who were the key people within that. And we spent about an hour mapping out who was doing what, who were the key people we thought, who were the key movers and shakers in that activity, and what were the the links between those elements, and where were those people coming from. So, for example, if an executive is moved into a new role, but they've got an existing history of the previous area, that can be something that I would link and show, because that might mean that if they were previously buying one product or service, but you offer a different service, then you can start to see, okay, they're now into a new role. Can I take this new element I'm offering and take that to that new person based upon the fact they've moved into a different environment or different role? So, and I hate this word, it's a bit bullshit bingo-y, but what are the synergies between what they do and what you offer? Because ultimately, you're going to have a range of services that you put together. And we ideally want to sell more of them into one company. But you've got to be able to make sure, as I said at the start, that you link that to what your customer is looking to do rather than just what you want to do. It's just because it's what you want doesn't mean to say it's what the buyer wants. You've got to understand their marketplace and their company, but also then start to map that out. Start to look at who the people in that company are. And I always think about in organizations, there are 3 levels of people. There are decision makers at the top who make decisions. There are influencers and there are implementers. So you've got to think about it is who are the implementers and the influencers? Who do the people you know? Maybe there's people that you've got connections with, and bring other people into your team. I don't think it's done enough that teams come together for account customer mapping, where people just sit in a room for an hour and talk through a particular customer they want to work with, and sit and say, okay, let's talk through who knows who in that space and who's connected with that. And there's a bit of prep work they can do for that. But where could there be fits to what you offer? Especially if you've got, for example, these sorts of competitors that you work, that are in your industry, is there a way in which you can start to see whether the competitor is being used in certain environments and what the feedback is and whether people like that, who's the champions in those areas? Do that customer account mapping to see where their logic could be to link elements of what you offer to them. And I guess that's the third, links on to my third point, is sort of try and develop a bit of what I would call a value proposition. Map out the services that you offer and the reasons why they will fit alongside each other within that company. So, for example, a good way of doing that might be, let's just say you sell IT services into an organization, and part of the IT services that you sell might be just IT support. But what you also might want to then offer is some IT security services on top of that, as well as some connectivity services, as well as maybe, I don't know, some services for, additional sort of licenses of software. So you might look at those 4 areas and say, okay, we're currently selling this offering at the moment. Where could the value proposition be for us to take this other service into that customer, and why would that be a logical fit? So it might well be, for example, let's say you're providing IT support to them, but you're not providing a cybersecurity support. You might then be able to say, okay, based upon the fact of the services the software, the systems that they've got in place at the moment, that they are so crucial to that business or that organization, you can then start to say to someone, okay, if those services weren't available, the implications would be quite significant for the organization. And at the moment, there's a security gap here because we've got some things that we've not covered from a cyber perspective. And I don't want you guys to be in a position where your software, your support and your systems are not being looked after and are not in a good place. So let's see if we can offer this additional service or provide you with this additional service to prevent a bigger problem happening with your core systems. And that's a really good example of where you can do what I would call a value proposition. And maybe you can even link into that then, the third angle of that, which will be, and if we actually ensure that there are no separate systems, so if you're using a separate phone system, that could create a risk to the security. But if we bring all that together, so we've got one system with, alongside our support, which is cyber secure, there are 3 ways in which we can ensure that the business has got great continuity and is going to work for the future. And what that does is it makes the solution sort of makes sense from the customer's perspective. And a lot of the times customers will look at things and think, well, you're pushing me down a pathway because you want it rather than it being good for me. And so what we've got to do is to map out what that value proposition could look like and why it could work. And then we've got to sanity check that. We've got to check that we're not just thinking about it in our heads, but we've got to really make sure that what we're sharing and thinking will make logical sense. And yeah, it does make sense to link that to that to that because of the fact that each one of those could cause an issue in another area. And when you start to do that, and when you start to show customers that you care about them and their overall solution, not just about feathering your own pocket, things start to happen and engage well. So I really encourage you to think about that overall offer and that proposition, but link it in, like I say, to where the customer and the company's going and where their marketplace is going. Because if you don't link it into those areas, the proposition might make sense to you, but if they're heading, if that proposition is in B, but they're heading towards A, then you're going to end up looking like an idiot, basically, and they're certainly not going to engage with you and take that element on board. And very often in businesses, we tend to think we tend to have the best, our rose-tinted glasses on, and we tend to think everything's perfect about what we do and how we do it. But actually, sometimes the market's changed or the market's moving in a different direction. We adjust to that. So really think about those sort of propositions. And I guess the fourth element, just to add to that, is what I see so many organizations not doing are building what I would call sales playbooks or blueprints to engage with that audience. They've done all this work, they've done this understanding, they've done this mapping, they've created a value proposition, but then they try and wing the engagement. And I think that's the worst thing you can do, is to just try and hope that what you're doing will work and will achieve the results. It's more often than not destined to failure. It more often, if you've got multiple people working in the business that don't have a plan to work towards, they'll all do their own thing, which can cause you multiple challenges as well. So I really encourage you to think about ensuring that you document that and build a plan and a playbook. And I'm not saying that needs to be something that's just sort of an old document that sits in it should be a live document. It should be a live engagement of how you're going to engage with that organization at different points and times. So really try and build that sales playbook to engage. And the playbook should be, what are you going to do at what stage? How is it going to work? How are people going to react? What sort of reaction are you going to get? You try and, if you like, document as much of that so that everyone can guide it consistently. If you think about, an army going to battle, if the army were going to battle and literally each member of the army, each member of the thing was going off in a different direction, doing their own things, they'd lose the battle, they'd lose the war. Whereas if they've got a clear purpose and a clear outline and a clear playbook of what to do and how to do it, with different teams then doing different parts of that and making sure they feed that information back in, you've got a better plan to be able to execute on what you want to achieve. So build that sales playbook. And if you don't know how to do it, that's again something me and my team have helped organizations with. Build that playbook so you can know, once you've built all that great stuff to implement it. Okay, so those are some of the four areas around sort of trying to sell services to these organizations. But a couple of other things to consider when you think about offering these services into people. So let's say you've got one service at the moment, but you've got two or three others that are in the wings that you want to sell to them. It's very difficult, pretty much nigh impossible, to get to sell them all straight away. Most organizations are not going to say, okay, great, yeah, we'll just take that service in and then we'll take all of your services in and straight away sign a deal. And when I hear people do that, I think like, you're naive. That organizations and people don't work that way. Again, if I think about relation to insurance, if I was to buy insurance from an organization, I would want to test out the insurance. I would want to test out the customer service. I'd want to test out the way that company operates before I'm then going to say, yeah, I'm going to commit to doing more. And companies that try and sell initially and then within a couple of days later or a couple of weeks later then sell other services, you're doing, I think in most cases, unless there's a really good reason why that person should buy it, you're doing too much too soon. It's nigh impossible to sell all straight away. So my advice is to do the following. It's to lead with your best offering. What's the best offering that you've got that meets the market demand that organization has, and is also a service offering that you bring out that is a really strong offering? And lead with that to start off with. And then once you lead with that, you can then what we call land and expand and add more to it. And I'm going to give you a practical example in my own business. So in my own business, we will provide sales blueprint services, and we'll help organizations hit sales targets. And we go very much on a sales basis to start off with. That's our driver. That's our focus. But what we'll also then do is when we get into organizations, we sometimes then see that the marketing elements that they've worked with are not really at the levels that they need to be. The content creation is not great. The marketing of on Facebook or Google Ads isn't great. And their social media content isn't great. So what we then do is we'll go and say, okay, great. Well, we can bring in part of our team to help with those elements, and we can then charge an additional service for that. And that's what we do. And we will do that in order to be able to then generate the end result for the customer. And we've done that quite recently, where we've gone initially is from a sales perspective, but then we've brought our marketing team in to then help them with that and offer that as a service. So really see selling in this environment as being a case of land and expand. get in there and with that organization with your best offering, and then be in a position, well, give it a little bit of time, and you can then see what reaction and response you've had to it. How are people engaging with your service, your software, whatever you're offering in there? What's the reaction you're getting from the teams and the executives and the people there? And then you can then start to see, okay, once you get that positive feedback, especially if you're measuring that information, you can then start to see how you build on it from there. And I guess to add to this, accept that that's going to take some time, that you can't do that sort of stuff overnight. That probably takes, certainly in some companies, 6, 12 months, a year. It's not going to happen overnight. People are going to take some time to get used to you and your company and what you do before they start rolling out the checkbook. But as we talk about, as I mentioned in the playbook, there is a key thing which you then need to be able to do to then engage in. And that's where good account management comes in, where the account managers are not just being lazy and resting on their laurels, but are going and asking questions and building relationships. And the next point linked again, all these points are linked together as part of the same sort of offering. But you have to make sure that if you are going in with that initial service and you're going to accept things take time, you have to deliver on what you promise. If you don't deliver initially on what you said you were going to do, no one's going to buy other services from you. They're just not. If they think that the service that they're getting from you is not at the level they want, or they've got complaints about it, or you promised something and it didn't deliver, they're not going to buy the other services. They're just going to feel it's not working for them. So you have to focus really hard. And business, like I said at the start, you get your rewards in profitability with customers over time. When you sell multiple services in time, you're not getting that straight away. And sometimes in business, when we have to over-service and under-promise and over-deliver initially to get customers really loving what we do, to then be in a position where they then feel they want to buy other services from us. So you have to deliver that to start with. And if you do that, then people feel comfortable to then do more and buy more and take on more from you. So if you've done those things and you're in great position, I think that's a key aspect of that. And you've built those relationships. One of the key things as part of the next point to this is around land and expanding, is to really make sure that you engage with multiple stakeholders and people in the business, and build relationships into different areas of the organization. So, and this sometimes can be a challenge, actually, in many cases, especially the large organizations you go to, because there is politics in these organizations. There are lots of people that don't talk in each other in the same way. Or if you're working with one division and then start talking to another division, they get a bit frustrated that that's happening. I know there's a large organization that I've worked with where I worked with all 3 different departments of that, but I knew that the 3 leaders of those different departments didn't get on, didn't like each other. So there were some challenges around doing that. But because I engaged with multiple stakeholders and I made myself visible to those different people and I got to know their different perspectives, I was able to offer some training and support in each individual case. So really just have a little think about how you can build relationships in with those senior people and selling to different levels of the business. Go back to what I said at the start, decision makers, influencers and implementers. It's great to work with implementers and those that are influencers, but if you really want to get business done, you've got to sell at those executive levels, and those decision maker levels are the people that can, especially if you sell ultimately into CEOs and chairs, those are the people that can roll stuff out across all of their teams and different divisions and can roll out multiple things if they can see that it's going to do what you want that you've said it will do. So really try and look to build multiple stakeholders in the organization. And you have to do this carefully. Like I say, I've seen many people, and I've even had this myself, where I've gone in and had conversations with one person, and the person that I initially sold in, who I built a great relationship to, got really frustrated and pissed off with me because they were thinking that I was leaving them behind, and I'd basically, I'd sort of done my business there, and I was now on to the next person. And I had to be really clear with them. No, I'm still really keen to engage and support them and work with them, but I wanted just to build relationships and see if there's other people in that organization I could help. So you have to do that very carefully. Human beings are sensitive souls in many cases, and people can be frustrated. And if they feel that you're trying to go above them or to the side of them without telling them that, they'll even put blockers in the way, and they'll start to turn on you rather than help you. So be careful about that and how you approach that. There's a real science. And again, that's why account mapping is really important, because what you can start to do is map out the executive, the style of person they are, what could be the challenges in linking to other people. And you can start to, if you like, brainstorm and map out what could be the good things to do and what could create challenges. To get to know multiple stakeholders and get to see it from their perspectives. As I say, different people in organizations will have different perspectives, different KPIs and metrics on which they're being measured on. So don't assume everyone's being measured on the same way. They may not be. So once you start to look at these elements of building these plans, I think the key thing you've then got to do, if you do want to sell multiple services and deals in place, is do some creative thinking around the organization as a whole and what it could do for them. And a most simplest form of that might be, let's say you sell a service in that's £100,000 or £50,000. I don't know, whatever the figure is. Let's use £50,000 into a service. And you think that there are 4 services that you want to offer into that organization that can help them and it's going to make an impact for them, that are 4 lots of 50, which is 200, then maybe what you can do is you can put together a business case or some creative bundling that doesn't discount, because I don't like discounting, but you may sometimes have to maybe do a slightly better deal. But what you might be able to then do is to give them 300. If the overall value of the service is 200,000, you might be able to give them £250,000 worth of value across the 4 services, but for the price of 200,000. And if you have to discount, you might have to then do it for 175 for all 4 rather than 4 at 50. So if you get some creative thinking in place where you can then go, especially to senior levels in the business, and you can go to the CFOs, the chief financial officers, or the chief creative officers, the chief operating officer, or the CEO, and say to them, look, you need these services across all your 4 areas. You can go to each one of them individually, or you can buy it at one and we can do a better deal for you. People are open to that sort of stuff. They are open to it, especially if it can help them save money, and if the numbers that you're talking about are significantly material, impactful enough to the person and to who you're engaging with. And the more senior people are, the more that number's probably got to be bigger. But if it's a good number, that they'll look at it and they'll be interested to see if that can work, providing the first service that you've offered or it has worked and done its job and is making the impact and delivering the return that you said it will. So really think about it from a creative thinking. Is there some bundles? And again, I prefer people to add more services in than to discount away. I think when you discount, you then create a problem where later down the line, that company's then going to try and negotiate with you a bit more for pricing, and that can become challenging. Although, as you heard at the start, if you do get them on board and they start utilizing your services and you make yourself sticky in what you do and your tentacles reach out into their organization, it's very hard for them to move away. And I know an organization at the moment who basically is a good friend of mine. They run a software system that's in a very large operator at the moment. Their software is now so embedded in so many different areas and departments of that organization that even though the procurement team of that organization sort of say, oh, you need to sharpen your pencil, they've been able to go, no, we can't do it for any different price than that. They've even put the price up in some cases. And because they're so sticky and embedded and involved in the processes and the way in which that organization works, they're having to accept the prices. And it does make the customer a little bit frustrated sometimes, but it worked because they've so embedded as part of what you do. So really think about what those options could look like and how it could work. Or maybe there's a way in which you could, again, linking to core objectives and things that this business wants to do. Maybe there's some core aspects you can do that can put some data together in a chain that no other organization would be able to do. Is there some insights you can provide from one division to the other that could go into the senior level group of people that they wouldn't be able to get if they had 4 separate vendors working with them? So just do some creative thinking around your value proposition and how those elements could come together, and check that fits in from the buyer's perspective, and it's going to make them want to maybe consider this and see what sort of value you can bring to the table. And then the final thing I'd say to you about making sure that you do this and do the elements that we've talked about is to train your sales teams on the different options, or train the people involved in doing this on how to do this, and also how to cross-sell. There is a skill at being able to cross-sell. Again, training is something that I can do or other people do, but make sure that people know how to approach this stuff and how to sell other services. I did some training and some work with a legal company, and we were going through the process of trying to help them move different departments. If they're working with commercial, could they work with litigation? Could they work with conveyancing? And what used to happen in that organization, they would literally, it was like throwing rocks over the fence. They would literally chuck opportunities from existing customers over the fence to their other colleagues and then forget about it. And it was like, no, that's just a disastrous way to approach things. It's going to piss the customer off. You're going to create more problems. It's not going to work. So you've got to train your team on how to approach it, how to make sure that there is a referral document that's put together that can enable you to pass conversations from one group to another. How you can set up meetings and conversations to ensure that you transition the customer from the existing you're working with you into the new team, and building those relationships, and maybe making sure you've set one individual owner that can own that particular customer in your business. Again, great sales tactic is to make sure that there is some account directing or leadership in that customer, so that one person's responsible for making sure that the overall business of that company is being done in the right way. And train your teams on what to do, but what not to do as well. How to make sure they avoid certain situations or problems which can create challenges for you. So, if you don't train people, they're never going to know how to do it. But when it's done in the right way, based upon the plan that we've talked about, it can work brilliantly. And I guess the final thing for me to think about, and these are the positives of what we've done, which is great, and those are things that we want to be able to do. But I guess the final thing that I would say around this is to make sure that you also think a little bit around the negatives to this, because you might want to sell these services in, and that's fine. I get that. But you also have to understand it a little bit from the buyer's perspective. And one of the things that will make a buyer really concerned in doing this, a couple of things that will make them concerned, and we can deal with them, and we won't cover them off in today's podcast, but you can deal with them, but you have to deal with them in the right way. So the first one is, from the buyer's perspective, they'll think about it as risk. I.e., have they got too many of their eggs in one basket? So if they're using 4 services from you, and then, for example, you were in a position that you were able to move your prices up, there will be people, CFOs and senior people, operation procurement people, that will be going, is it too risky to move all of those services into one? Because it means that we're totally reliant on that company. And there'll be people there going that creates risk. Now, obviously, in business and in life, there is a risk and reward. The reward they gain from doing it might outweigh the risk, and therefore they're happy to do it. But it will be in their mind. And so you've got to be able to think about and understand that, and then know how you're going to deal with that in the right way. And you have to calm them, and you have to show a path that show why it's the right thing for them, and how it's going to benefit them, and how your bundle, your business case that you've put together for these multiple services can really make sense for them, rather than it being a risk for them to do. But I also think you've got to think about it as well from risk comes in many forms, and risk comes in form certainly of financial risk. And if the systems and services that you're offering are embedded in this organization, don't be surprised when the organization wants to see a bit more about your financial background and your picture, and who owns you, and your stability as an organization. They're going to want to check that you've got all of those things in place to make sure that if something went wrong with your company, they're not going to be left in the lurch. People don't want to feel like there's that risk of working with an organization that's flaky financially, or isn't going to be able to meet their demands and do what's required over time. So just understand these things. These are the risks that your buyers are going to be thinking, or certainly senior people at that organization are paid to think about these type of risks. So don't ignore it. Don't just think, it won't happen and it'll go away. They are critical, and they make a difference. But look, as I said, I've sold successfully into a number of large organizations, multiple services. I've also been in a position where I've helped organizations do this. It can be done. It can be done in the right way. If you go through the elements that I've talked about throughout the podcast, you can achieve great success. And when you do, that stickiness stays and grows, and it becomes an incredible business model for you to work with. But it has to be done in the right way. Otherwise, as I say, you can create some challenges and problems for yourself. And also you can go down a path you think is right and spend a lot of money. But if you haven't done the steps that we've talked about today, you'll waste that money in the first place. So I want you to avoid that. But I hope that's given you some tips on how you can sell multiple elements into services, how you can do that upsell, or that approach to be able to cross-sell in this way to get you and your company where you want to be. But as ever, I always finish the podcast on an inspirational story. And I wanted to talk about a story today, which was when I heard about this lady, it was quite incredible to think about what happened. So a number of years ago, a lady called Grace Spence Green was a medical student, and she was in a shopping centre in London, and this is just quite remarkable when you think about what happened. She was in a shopping centre in Westfield in London, and sadly, a man decided 3 floors above where she was to jump, and that sadly, that person obviously thought that they wanted to, commit suicide, which is terrible to think about. But what happened was that person landed on this lady called Grace Spencer Green, and not only by landing on her, he actually broke her back and fractured her neck. And basically, when she woke up, she was paralyzed, and she couldn't basically her spinal cord had been massively affected, and it was squashed, and she basically had this issue where she literally was disabled and paralyzed from the waist down. And when you think about that, someone tried to commit suicide, and the only way, if she'd have been a meter to the side, she would have, this person would have collapsed to the floor in front, behind her, and that may have affected her. But anyway, it hit this lady called Grace. And the reason I think it's an incredible inspirational story is that, the man who landed on her actually was sentenced to some time in prison because he didn't suffer any injuries. But she would always say that she saved someone's life that day, and she used that inspirational story to basically ensure that she was able to inspire other people. And since then, even though she's been in a wheelchair, she's been one of these people that's campaigned and done a number of things to help other people that have been in wheelchairs achieve what they want to in life. And I heard that story and I was like, wow, what an incredible story of someone that was just doing their daily life, going about their daily work and their thing. And literally in a second, something happened which paralyzed them, and which could have affected that person's life, and which could have made them think, poor me, and look at the situation. But she's vowed to change and get on and do the things that she needs to do now to live her best life and to inspire others. And I think when I read that story, it was like, wow, that needs to be on my inspirational stories for the podcast. What an incredible scenario of Grace Spence Green, who basically found a new purpose as a result of someone falling on her and literally paralyzing her. And I think when you think about today and what's going on in your life today, imagine if that was you, and the fact that if you are able still, hopefully there are lots of people listening that are from different walks of life, and I sometimes think we're all very lucky to realize that we've got our arms and our legs and the use of our bodies and whatever else to do the things that we do. And if you haven't got those things, then I know you're inspiring people through dealing with any adversity, any disability. Then I take my hats off to you, and incredibly in awe of people that are not letting whatever's happened to them affect their life in that way. So Grace Spence Green is my inspirational story for today. I hope that gives you some motivation to think, actually, do you know what? I'm going to make sure I do the things in my life that I need to do to be grateful for what I've got and build from there onwards. But look, that's it for this week's podcast. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's a bit of a longer one than normal, talking about how to sell multiple services into businesses, but I hope you found it useful. If you have, as ever, please reach out to me. Tom, who asked me this question, sent me this email on message on LinkedIn. Please reach out if you're listening to this and thinking, I'd love James to cover a story or something I've not heard in the podcast. Please let me know. I'd love to cover it as part of what we do, and I'll make sure that we give you the insights that you need to hopefully get the sales, the success and results you want. But as ever, thank you so much for your time. If you do love the podcast, please can I just ask you, couldn't you give it a rating or a review on your Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to the podcast? It helps me so much make sure that we can grow the podcast and add more episodes and do more in time. But as ever, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening and giving me your eyes if you're watching. It's so amazing to share some insights with you and help you achieve the sales success that I truly want you to have. And thanks again. See you next week. Stay safe. Happy selling. Remember, eat or be eaten. Everything's in your choice. Make it happen. Have a great week. See you later.